So, here we are. I thought this was a great passage for the second week of Christmas, as we think about what it was like really for Jesus to come to earth, to be present among us, and for his parents in this case to experience that. From the time that he was a young child. This is actually the only glimpse we get in the Gospels of Jesus between infancy and adulthood. We just get this one little snapshot. So we have to use our imaginations to think about what it would have been like for Mary and Joseph to be raising God incarnate in their household. And we catch them in this moment where they are in transit. They're moving from Nazareth. They're going to Jerusalem for the Passover, and they're returning home. Can you imagine a day into your road trip home realizing you've left a kid at home? This is like the original Home Alone scenario, but the other way around. Anyway, 3 days not knowing where your kid is. Can you imagine? We have some kids around that age, and I can only imagine what it would have been like to be 3 days looking for your child in the biggest city, the capital city, and to be the disorientation and the anxiety, and then to find him in the temple completely at home. And this line, "Did you not know that I would be in my Father's house?" Because Jesus isn't lost. He's exactly where he belongs. Mary and Joseph don't understand. They didn't understand, even at the end of the story. But Mary treasured these things, these memories, in her heart. So we find ourselves at a moment in our year where we're in transit too. Between years, between seasons, some of us between chapters of life, turning a page, and that always brings some disorientation and some uncertainty and some searching. And in this moment, as we have just celebrated New Year's Day and we're moving into a new year, the world asks us, new year, new you, what's your plan? But this passage asks us a different question. It asks us, where is Jesus? And the answer is, he's where he's always been, in the Father's presence. And because of Christmas, here with us. So, I'd like to move us into another gospel passage to think about alongside this Luke 2 passage, because Luke shows us the boy Jesus grounded in his Father's presence. But there's another text that tells us who this child really is and why his presence does change everything. And so it's written in your, if you want to read along, there's these verses are in your notes, but they're also, you can just, if not, you can just listen along. This is from John chapter 1, verses 14 and 16. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. Dwelt. He dwelt among us. The Greek word here is eskenosin. And it's the same word that in the Greek word refers to, it's a reference that the original readers who were familiar with the stories from the Hebrew Scriptures would have known that this is a word that's used to describe the tabernacle in the Old Testament. So, and it's a verb form, so it's like, he came and tabernacled among them. Pitched a tent. He took up residence. And it would have called up images among these Hebrew people who were scholars of the Hebrew Scriptures, the image of the wilderness tabernacle, the Shekinah glory of God coming to dwell among his people. God, and then now God filling the temple, right, to them. So this 12-year-old saying, my Father's house, he is his Father's house. Heaven and earth meet in the person of Jesus. and he has pitched his tent with us. So I want to just present us with an idea today. This is something I've been thinking about as we've moved into this new year. So the best preparation for an uncertain future and for a new year isn't a better plan. It's a deeper memory and a receptive posture and a faithful response to Christ's presence with us. So I want us to think about those three words as we talk today. Remember, receive, and respond. Let's first talk about remembrance, memory. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So Christmas isn't over yet. And while culture around us is ready to move on, we took down our Christmas decorations yesterday because, Epiphany's coming. What? Some of them. The nativity scene's still up because the wise men are still making their way from the library into the Bethlehem side table in the living room. But in the church, we have this 12-day season of Christmas, the 12 days of Christmas. Most of the world around us doesn't know that Christmas is just the first day of Christmas. We're in this season where we aren't rushing past this moment where we remember that Jesus came to be among us. God moved in permanently. And that's important because we don't step into the new year from nowhere. We step in from the manger, from God with us. So as I've done research and thinking about this in my own work and professional life, I've seen that the most resilient people are not the people with the best plans. They're the people with the clearest memories. They're the people who are anchored in identity and in values and in who they are and who God made them to be and who God is, right? So we need the anchor of this moment, not just looking forward and saying what's next, but also saying, what is our anchor? What are we anchored in? Memory isn't a rearview mirror. It's a compass that allows us to move forward. So I want us to take a moment here just to remember. Before we rush on to what's next, we need to remember where we stand. So I want you to take a minute, and in your notes, I've created a space for you to jot down a note. And if you don't have a note sheet, you can just do this in your head, but also hold this question in your thoughts as you move into this week. Where did you see God show up in 2025? Where did you see God show up in 2025? If something comes to mind, jot it down. Because he showed up. So that's the ground where you stand. We're not nowhere. We're standing on God's faithfulness to us in the past, on ground that God has marked. And based on that, I want us to take a moment to receive. This passage tells us we have seen his glory, full of grace and truth. We have seen. As we launch into a new year, we often think about achievement. What do we want to achieve? What do we want to strive for? What do we want to do? But this passage calls us not to achievement, but first to attentiveness. Attentiveness to what God has been doing and therefore what God might do. The disciples didn't cook up some grand vision. They didn't cook up a grand self-improvement plan. They beheld glory, grace, truth, received, not achieved. So January is all about output energy, right? Goals, plans, hustle. We're going to get some stuff done, make resolutions. But John calls us to attention and to beholding. And so the first posture of this new year, I would challenge you to think about not being declaration of what I'm going to do, but receptivity of what God is already doing. Not what is my self-help program, but what is God revealing that I might join in? So, we're going to create another moment for you to reflect. Instead of saying, what's my plan for 2026, I want you to invite you into a different question. What might God be inviting you into this year? What might God be inviting you into this year? Not what you should fix, not what you're behind on. What invitation is already present that you haven't said yes to? Let's take a few seconds to think about that. What might God be inviting you into this year? And if nothing comes to mind, let that question stay with you this week. Pay attention. What might God be inviting you into this year? Because it's in receiving that word that we have a chance to respond. To respond. Out of his fullness, we have all received grace upon grace. Karen antikaritos is the Greek. Grace upon grace, wave after wave of grace, grace replacing grace. It's not a one-time infusion of grace into our lives. It's wave after wave. It's overflowing abundance of grace in our lives. Resolutions, which is what we often spend a lot of time in January thinking about, is usually based in deficit thinking. I'm not enough. I have to fix this. I have a shortcoming. I've got something I need to improve. But response, the way we're talking about it today, comes out of abundance thinking. Not deficit thinking, abundance thinking. We have received enough and we can move forward with Christ. The world script says we're behind, got to catch up, got to try harder. But the script of our faith says step into 2026 with fullness to draw from, not a deficit to overcome. So the invitation is that we don't have a life to overhaul. We don't have a self-improvement plan. We just respond to God's grace and take the next faithful step. So here's the final challenge today. Not to create a list of resolutions. Resolutions don't have to be bad. But one next faithful step. So, we often have fill in the blanks in our notes. I'm giving you fill in the blank, but I'm not going to tell you what to put in the blanks. So here's the formula. Because God blank, I will blank. All right? So a couple examples. Because God has been faithful, I will trust him with this decision I've been struggling with, or this thing I've been avoiding. Or because God has forgiven me, I will initiate that conversation with the person I care about that I've been putting off. Or because God is with me, I will stop living afraid. Because I will. Not just I will, because that's what New Year's resolutions are, right? It's just I will do this. But this is a chance for us to reflect on a way forward that's rooted in God's faithfulness to us, what God's been doing in our lives, anchored in the journey that he's had us on. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds here to just think about that, to jot down something that comes to mind. Because God blank, I will blank. So that sentence, whether you wrote it down, I would probably have to think about it more than 30 seconds. But there may be a seed of an idea coming to mind. I would challenge you to think about that, to take that with you from today. As you think about resolutions, reframe them as responses to what God has been doing and what God is doing around us. And it's a response to grace that allows us to step into a new year as part of this body. So back to Luke 2, remember Mary's example? The example of Mary, she didn't fully understand. She didn't demand clarity before moving forward, but she treasured all these things in her heart. She held on to the mystery. Jesus increased in wisdom and stature, growth in something that wasn't yet understood. So sometimes faithfulness means a next step without full comprehension. Stepping forward in faith because we can see what God has been doing and we're focusing on a vision that's not anchored to reality is a recipe for failure and for moving forward in a way that doesn't hold on to the journey that God has had us on. God pitched a tent. He tabernacled among us. A tent, the tabernacle, was movable. It was designed for the journey. God didn't build a fortress. He pitched a tent that's ready to move forward with us as God's people move, to lead us as we move forward together. So we don't know what this year holds, but we know who has moved in. The same Jesus that was about his Father's business at the age of 12 was the Word made flesh, and he is dwelling with us still. So let me close this in prayer. Lord, I pray that you would help this word, this call to remember, to respond to what you're doing, that you help us to take root in my heart, in our hearts, preaching to myself today as much as anyone else. Lord, whether we're thinking about the need to trust you more, the need to repair relationships, to rest, to risk, to finally say yes to something we've been avoiding, whatever is coming to mind today, Lord, let that be our next faithful step. Not the whole year, just the next step. And like Mary, I pray that you would help us to, even though we don't fully understand what you're up to treasure it, to hold it, to keep walking. Because the God who has been faithful, you who have been faithful, are still here. You're still dwelling with us, still full of grace and truth. We don't know what's coming, but we know who has moved in. And he's not staying behind. He's coming with us. He's going ahead of us, preparing the way. Amen.